If Terrence Howard somehow or another, if it's the craziest story ever, and Terrence Howard is like literally one of the smartest guys that ever lived, and he's got all these genius ideas and inventions, and even though he seems it seems just insane that this is coming from an actor. This is from the Hustle and Flow guy? What?
I understand it though.
I kind of understand
it. I understand.
I mean, it made sense.
To me, he's making me believe.
I recently learned I got name-checked by Terrence Howard on his recent appearance on Joe Rogan. What can happen is if you're a fan of a subject, let's say, a hobbyist, let's call it, it's possible to know enough about that subject to think you're right, but not enough about that subject to know that you're wrong. This has been studied by others, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
So it looks like Terrence Howard was the straw that broke Joe Rogan's brain. It's been a month since he appeared on JRE, and with almost 10 million views on YouTube, apart from the Cat Williams episode with 20 million, Terrence has been the gift that keeps on giving. In almost every episode since, Rogan or his guest has brought up Terrence and his theories, but none have been more entertaining than in the latest episode with chef-turned-rapper Action Bronson. Their discussion of teriology has to be the dumbest conversation I've ever heard on Joe Rogan's podcast, and in one of the most perfect manifestations of irony put forth by the universe, Neil deGrasse Tyson dropped a diss track video setting the record straight on all the shit that Terrence Howard was talking about him in that now infamous podcast.
I recently learned I got name-checked by Terrence Howard on his recent appearance on Joe Rogan.
I reached out to Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was like, hey man, yeah, I'd love for you to come on my show, do my radio, do my TV thing. Would love that. I was like, yeah, but I've got something I want to introduce to you.
I got name-checked because 8 years ago, he sent me a 36-page treatise.
And it was only 36 pages.
So this is Terrence Howard attempting to reinvent mathematics and physics.
So now Tyson and Terrence are officially beefing. Tyson's diss track was 17 minutes long, and in 2 days since it's dropped, it has well over 3 million views. And like we just saw, he dusted off the document that Terrence sent him 8 years ago to go through and set the record straight on all the lies that Terrence has been saying about him.
In this particular case, since I basically solicited it from him, I actually spent time reading every line of all 36 pages, and I commented. My comments are in red here. You see that? So I spent a lot of time on it, and I thought, out of respect for him, what I should do is give him my most informed critical analysis that I can. In my field, we call that a peer review.
All jokes aside, this was one of the most humble takedowns I've ever seen. Neil was so polite and methodical in the way he refuted not only Terrence's pseudo-scientific theories, but also his personal shots at Neil's integrity and character, which turned out to be completely made up and potentially defamatory. But Tyson isn't as squeaky clean as he might have you believe. Back in 2018, when the Me Too movement was in full swing, accusations started coming out about Tyson's past behaviors, some of which were quite serious. Tyson denied the more serious allegations, which to this day remain unproven. However, he did admit to some inappropriate behavior with women, and he apologized for it. So there's definitely some fuel in there for Tyson and Terrence's beef. I covered some of Terrence's indiscretions in my recent video on his JRE appearance, including how Terrence actually pleaded guilty to charges relating to the stalking, harassment, and assault of his ex-wife. Once again, Cat Williams is tapping us on the shoulder and whispering, I told you so. But just before we ascend Mount Stupid with Rogan and Action Bronson, take a look at Tyson's polite but brutal takedown of Terrence Howard.
Let me make it clear that I'm delighted when I see people with active minds trying to tackle the great unknowns in the universe. It's a beautiful thing that people want to participate on this frontier. What can happen is if you're a fan of a subject, let's say, a hobbyist, let's call it, it's possible to know enough about that subject to think you're right, but not enough about that subject to know that you're wrong. And so there's this sort of valley in there, a valley of false confidence, This has been studied by others, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's the phenomenon where a little bit of knowledge, you over-assess how much of that subject you actually know. And then when you learn even more, you realize, no, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. So then there's a sort of a lull there. And then when you learn even more, you come back up. Ultimately, learning enough to know whether you were right or wrong. To become an expert means you spend all this time. It doesn't happen overnight. You can't just sit in an armchair and say, I'm now an expert. It requires years and years of study.
Regulars of this channel will be familiar with Joe Rogan and his 6 never-been-funny comedians' dedication to the Dunning-Kruger effect. I've covered this several times across many different videos. Some of the biggest offenders have been Bert Kreischer, Andrew Schultz, Brandon Schwab, and of course Papa Rogan himself. Now, thanks to Neil deGrasse Tyson, we can add Terrence Howard to that list, because we really needed a scientist to tell us what we already knew, right? Anyway, let's head over to Mount Stupid to get the latest analysis on the frontiers of mathematics and science. This is how it started.
By the way, I feel like an asshole sometimes when I come on here. Terrence Howard? Yeah, no, I don't even know what to say. I was like Googling shit to talk about after that. But what the what in the actual
First of all,
I understand it though.
I kind of understand,
I understand.
I mean, it made sense.
To me, he's making me believe.
There's no way he's just he's a lunatic. Like I've heard people
just
say,
lie. You can't just come up on that.
He's making things. I'm like, I don't think that's correct. He knows too much.
No.
So is he correct? I don't know. And then that's what has to happen is Terrence Howard has to sit down with someone who's an academic, someone who's got a PhD in whatever discipline they're talking about, and they can have a discussion. To me, it all makes sense, but I'm a moron.
No, you're not.
But if you're talking to a mathematician, or if you're talking to a physicist, someone who actually can understand what these computations mean and what he's trying to say about 1 multiplied by 1 can't be
like
1.
No mathematics.
Yeah.
Everything is bullshit. I believe that. I wasn't good in algebra. I see it more in a linear way, not a linear way, a different way than him, like more similarly to him.
Right.
Okay. There's something I recently noticed, and I discussed it on my latest Patreon video about Rogan making stuff up, and it's that there's a whole bunch of people out there that want to believe pseudoscientific theories, either because they're bored of the truth, or they can't understand the truth, or they're just sick of following mainstream ideas. So as much as I want to shit on Action Bronson for the things he's saying there, I also kind of understand where he's coming from in this weird, strange way, and that could be one of the reasons why Rogan's podcast is so popular. He's breathing life into all these crazy ideas at a time when trust in the scientific community and the government is at all-time lows. I'll talk more about this a little bit later on because Joe and Bronson start talking trash about scientists, which was pretty funny. As for Terrence Howard though, clearly anyone who understands fractions and basic multiplication and division can prove his theories wrong, but 8 years ago when Tyson peer-reviewed Terrence's paper, this is what he had to say about it.
I'm going to read you just my opening line here. It's titled 1 × 1 = 2. So I lead off by saying, this is an ambitious work that is a clear indication of a restless, active mind. Within these pages, however, there are many assumptions and statements that are underinformed, misinformed, or simply false, thereby compromising or nullifying many of the subsequent conclusions you have drawn. It can never occur that the square root of a given number, when added to itself, is greater than the initial number squared, for that would expose a loose thread within the fabric of our understanding, a loose thread capable of unraveling the very ground rules of mathematics. That's a bold statement. So then I just say, this opening thesis is false. There are plenty of examples of this that have escaped your attention. His statement is shown to be false for every number that's less than 1 and greater than 0. For example, the square root of 0.64 is 0.8. 0.8 is bigger than 0.64, and it's a larger number than the original. And 0.64 squared equals 0.4096, a smaller number than the original. To the extent that the next 35 pages depends on your stated thesis. This fact undermines your claims and assumptions and conclusions. It's not about feelings here. It's about objective reality.
Bro just pulled Ben Shapiro's "Facts don't care about your feelings" on Terrence Howard. And it's funny that Tyson brought up feelings versus reality there. A lot of the pseudoscience that Rogan promotes is based off feelings. For example, even Terrence himself explained to Rogan how these theories came to him when he channeled the memories of being in his mother's womb and accessed an untapped part of his consciousness by having inception dreams within dreams, giving him access to a mansion of knowledge full of shapes representing solutions to the world's problems.
So you felt like that, like from the womb?
From the womb, I had to get this done.
So you felt like you had these things that you didn't get out in a previous lifetime, and now you feel like an unstoppable urge.
I have to. I remember all of that.
You remember coming out?
Remember being compressed. I remember being born. I remember being circumcised. I remember the whole nine. But for me, that's where it started, in there. And then when I was about 5 years old, I had another dream, and the room filled up with like this fluid, a dark fluid, and I could see the ripples of it moving around, and there was a being there, and I remember being walked through that fluid with him. He said to me, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be? But I said to him, I want to know how everything works. And at that moment, he used his left hand and he opened up the door. And there was this mansion, big brown doors. And inside of it was these crystalline flowers, big crystalline flowers, like a giant, like 5 feet across. And every time I tried to see his face, he would reach in and hand me another shape. Each shape was different and amazing. And I woke up from that dream. But after that moment, anytime something strange would happen in a dream, I had the powers of inception. Anytime I would be naked at school, I would say, I'm not naked. I must be dreaming. And immediately, I would run out of the school or run out of wherever I was, and I would find that mansion again. And I had access to all the knowledge.
Yeah, I don't know how any sane person can listen to that and conclude that they're sitting with a genius. Like, the amount of rope that Rogan gave this guy is wild. If he wasn't such a rich and famous movie star, he would have been committed by now. Anyway, back to the conversation with Action Bronson. Oh man, this is the gift that keeps on giving.
And then he's talking about how the periodic table's all fucked up. And this is what's, you're like, wait a minute. What are you doing? How can you do this?
I understand because of music, I understand the way I feel what he's saying.
Yeah.
Like, stop trying to uncover just all these little micro bullshit.
What do you mean?
Like I said, I'm a idiot. I'm trying to regurgitate what I heard.
Just always be cautious of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
As far as all the elements in between.
Yeah.
Like, why are they there? When they're just...
You and I will never explain this in a way that's not hugely frustrating to anybody who really knows it.
I can't even remember what I'm trying to say, but
Yeah. The way he was explaining how everything's connected.
Exactly.
Yeah. And when you look at it like the way he was describing it, you're like, oh, wow, that kind of makes more sense. It does make sense. That's it. I mean, it just looks beautiful.
That's fire.
So there's a lot going on in there. First of all, the way the periodic table of the elements is structured is based off the number of protons in the nucleus of an atom, which gives you each element's atomic number. This way of organizing the elements was developed over several decades throughout the 19th century, but let's throw all of that out the window because it makes sense to Joe Rogan that the periodic table should be structured based off Terrence Howard's frequency vibration theory, which also makes sense to Action Bronson because he can feel it too. Man, I love the internet. And did you hear what Bronson was saying there about there being too much microanalysis? This is the part that I find the most interesting because I've heard this before. It's the idea that the world is overanalyzed and we're thinking about everything in too much detail. We just need to step back and go with our feelings.
Because of music, I understand the way I feel what he's saying.
Yeah.
Like, stop trying to uncover just all these little micro bullshit.
What do you mean?
Like I said, I'm a an idiot. I'm trying to regurgitate what I heard.
See, that's so interesting, right? That kind of thinking on a mass scale is pretty scary. Remember what I was saying earlier about how trust in the scientific community and governments around the world is at a low point? Well, it's not a stretch of the imagination to see that if enough people catch on to that same way of thinking, which is basically to stop digging for the truth using the scientific method and just accept what feels right or whatever theory is the easiest to understand, well, you can see how if that thinking was to reach the top levels of government and our most important institutions, it could fundamentally change the way we see the world and how we organize ourselves. It's already happening in some of the top universities. That's why I think it's important for the government to be transparent and honest about what they're doing and why they're doing it, because if they don't and people lose enough trust, there's a massive hole there that's easily filled with pseudoscience, not to mention all of the political agendas at play. And I know that Rogan's just talking, and most people like myself are only watching this stuff for the entertainment value, but every now and then you see a glimpse of the growing distrust we have of the scientific community coming out in these conversations.
Oh, Jamie,
That's dope art.
I need to know if this is true. I'm going to send you this, but it's so cool that I hoped and prayed that it was true, and I didn't even want to Google it. But it's that they took these photons.
I was trying to find that. I saw you.
Did you
post
see it?
I didn't find. I googled it and couldn't find anything.
How could this be
It seemed
fake?
like it
Why
was
would they be
new.
lying to me,
I'll
Jamie?
look specifically
Why
for
would they be
TV
lying
thing.
to me, Jamie?
What it looked
It's
like.
quantum entangled photons. So this is what it looks like. That's quantum entangled photons. Now, again,
Come
for
on,
the
that's
record,
fucking
I
crazy.
am a fucking idiot, okay? I don't even know what that means. I can say those words, quantum entangled photons, but if you made me like write down without
what
any
is it?
Googling in an essay what a quantum entangled photon exactly is. Well, I think what it is these particles are entangled in some way where they don't have to be in the same place and time, but they react to each other. There's some method or some way of understanding how this is done. It's all squirrely, yellow legal pad, chalkboard with a bunch of squiggles that you don't understand. Bananas talk. First of all, I don't trust these super dorks at all. Look at the photos of those people.
Yeah, I don't know, man. They're pretty young.
Yeah, they're all too smart. I don't trust them. They're speaking gibberish.
I need to see some old guys who came up with all this motherfucking shit, holography. Like, what the fuck is that? Where did this come
Scientist
from
dudes.
now?
Scientist dudes and gals and non-binary folk.
So I get that they're just talking shit and having a laugh. I know most of you watching get that as well, but there's a bunch of people out there who believe all of this and take it at face value. Don't forget that most of the comments on the Terrence Howard episode with thousands of likes, they were all supporting his theories and agreed that he's a genius and his theories should be studied more deeply and taken more seriously. And what about this idea that a scientist should look a certain way, but then Terrence Howard should be a trusted scientist as well? That is such a mind-blowing contradiction. As for Rogan, though, he's been quite open about how badly he wants aliens and UFOs to be real, and I think that's where his overindulgence in these theories come from. In his defense, he doesn't claim to have definitive evidence or to believe 100% in these theories. He always toes the line and says he's just asking questions and having conversations, but he always seems to be looking for the answers in the wrong places.
Well, I would imagine that there's probably more to all these things.
Those fucking
Even our
toys he made, the
mathematics.
figures.
Even our mathematics, like as brilliant as the people are who have created all the formulas that everyone's studying, I would imagine that in the future they're going to have even better methods of figuring things out, and that all these things are going to evolve, that they're not perfect. If we want to get to like what alien civilization looks like, when we want to get to like super insane levels of technology where they control all of the atmosphere, they literally can harness the power of stars, like there's so much work to do. Like if it's the craziest story ever, and Terrence Howard is like literally one of the smartest guys that ever lived, and he's got all these genius ideas and inventions, and even though he seems it seems just insane that this is coming from an actor, This is from the Hustle and Flow guy? What?
So like I was saying, it seems like Rogan really just wants to believe Terrence, even though he knows it all sounds a little bit crazy. And Neil deGrasse Tyson actually called out Terrence for using false logic to prove his theories. Terrence tried to compare himself with some of the most famous scientists in history by pointing out that some of them were ridiculed in their lifetimes, just like he is.
But go to page 2, and in here, he mentions people who he declares were persecuted because their vision exceeded the myopic view of their contemporaries. And he mentions Walter Russell, Nikola Tesla, John Keeley, and many, many more. Regarding your list of people who have made brave sacrifices, I note that to be a genius is to be misunderstood, but to be misunderstood is not to be a genius. The work of Russell, Walter Russell, has eluded any experimental support, and the work of Keeley is generally not reproducible. Science is about reproducibility. I can have the most brilliant, crazy, fun idea ever, and if I perform an experiment and no one else can duplicate that experiment, it belongs in the trash heap. It's me in my own world, thinking I have landed on an objective truth, when in fact I haven't. That's how science works. So I think on Rogan, Terrence said that I trashed those 3 researchers.
Attack that I had talked about Walter Russell and Victor Schauberger and John Keeley and Tesla as the people that I looked up to. So he
Tesla.
threw shit on he was like, well, Tesla stuff worked, but Tesla was never really respected and out there.
When I'm just simply stating the fact, I don't think of that as trashing. I think of that as being honest. I mean, I could have softened it, but I don't think that's what people who care about you should do. People who care will be honest with you about ideas. Just always be cautious of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You put in a little bit of work and you have an idea, and then you think your idea is right, and that Einstein is wrong, and Newton is wrong, and that everybody's wrong, and that all of modern astrophysicists are wrong. That's bold. That's bold. Audacious. Bodacious.
So I don't think that Tyson would have dropped this video if Terrence hadn't so badly misrepresented his response to the 36-page paper that he sent him 8 years ago. It turns out that Tyson was actually quite respectful and for the most part helpful when he was critiquing Terrence's paper, but Terrence wanted to make him out to be this scientific establishment villain. Luckily, Tyson brought receipts.
I will note that from this work, Terrence produces art, sculptural art, which I find to be intriguing, even beautiful. To me, more intriguing than beautiful, because you got to look at it and you keep looking at it, like, what is that? And what's going on there? I just want to read you my ending comments here. I could not follow the reasoning on these last few pages, but the illustrations that derive from them are beautiful, regardless of how they were derived. My notes have been strongly critical of your reasoning and conclusions. I was candid and blunt out of respect for the energy you have clearly invested in this work. But if you're sure that you are still right and that I have completely misunderstood your thesis, then you will need to look for another person to evaluate what you have done and solicit their comments. In any case, like I say above, the images and illustrations in your final pages are beautiful works of art, unlike any I have seen. Best to you, Neil. So, in case people wanted to know what actually went down 8 years ago.
So now that we know what really went down between Terrence and Tyson, it just makes Terrence look even worse. He clearly made stuff up to make Tyson look bad, as if he was up against this big scientific machine that wouldn't take him seriously. And just think about this, right? How many of us could just send Neil deGrasse Tyson a 36-page paper with no scientific background or credentials and get such a detailed and considered response? Terrence has had so many opportunities to get his ideas across, yet he claims that he's being silenced by the government and the CIA, etc. They're switching his phone off and listening to all his communications. Meanwhile, he was speaking freely for 3 hours on the biggest podcast in the world. But let's hope that Terrence hits back at Tyson and we get a full-on public beef going. I think the ultimate would be if Rogan got both of them on the podcast for a debate, maybe even get Flint Dibble on there too, just so I get to say his name a bunch of times in another video. But something tells me Tyson would probably turn down that invitation. Anyway, that's it from me. If you ended up enjoying this video and you want to see some of my uncensored content, head over to my Patreon where I can speak freely without any copyright restrictions and YouTube censorship regime via the link in the description. Otherwise, if you're not a regular of this channel yet, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you ended up enjoying this video. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.
The new method called biphoton digital holography uses an ultra-high precision camera and can be used to massively speed up future quantum measurements.
Well, then it's all bullshit. It's not real time. It's not real.
What do you mean?
See by the wording
It's
of
a
it.
it's like those it's like the AI shit. That's not a real image. They colored it and fixed it and put fade and brightness and you know, like how does that?
I don't know if they did. This has a reconstruction of a
Man,
holographic
I'm gonna get
image.
demolished. I'm a total moron.